welcome. So we're on to Henri, the first king of France. Now, Henry, unfortunately, on the seek out, it's bringing in everybody else. Yesterday he was there, but today he isn't. I guess, I don't know, maybe they seek out my history and turn it all to mush, because now he's only located here after I put in all these different things. He's only listed in the first three pretty much. But anyway, so here he is. He's Henri the First of Capet, and he goes through to 1060. He should have more here listed, but it seems like it's always they're bringing in Hugh, so I'm sorry for that. They just wanted to turn it to mush. So anyway, there it is. So be wary if you're looking. You're not always going to see that particular king. You have to really look at all the title of it. So yeah, this is one that we know more, so we see this all the time, and there were quite a few others and now they're gone. So I'm going to next head over to Wiki. Now Wiki doesn't change quite that often as a disruptor. So here we have Henry the First of England. I'll put that up there. Stupid thing. Okay, yeah, Henry the First of England, and not of England. Well, no, I take this back. Here we are, big. There is a Henry of England. Okay, confusion. You notice here there was the Beauclerk one, King of England. That's a different Henry. The Henry of France is a different one. So if you come across this Henry the First, it's the wrong one. It has to be Henry the First of. Let's try to find him. Henry I of France. There we go. King of the Franks, we're calling him. And no, he doesn't have a good Wikipedia site. They just gave him a really horrible. That's what the seal was. He was plunking down. He didn't really get anything nice. So, and I don't have anything else right now except to just head into the book, because we didn't get very good images off the old dude. Somebody made a genealogy chart in 12th century manuscript, and that's how he looked then in their illustration. So kind of unfortunate, isn't it? So it looks like this one possibly would be the be-all end-all of how he looked. So okay, folks, we're at page 284. So I am I don't even want to say it, but yeah, around halfway through the book. And I don't know, in a weird odd way, I don't want to finish it, because if it's just going to keep going on with famines and plagues, well, I know there's the Black Plague coming up, but I didn't know about that famine, and that was really shocking, and I'm kind of upset by it. And I don't want to be like given all kinds of like bad mojo from reading the past, and I almost get the feeling like the Robert, the the last one, his father, it's just like bad mojo. He had all that famine, and I don't want that to stir in my head, the rest of my life. So if it gets too brutal, I don't even care the brutality of war, actually, but when it gets brutal with famine and people eating each other, pulling Donner parties, I just get freaked out. And then we had, like, I just read somewhere that there was one, like a Mary one of them named Mary, and she just bonfired all these people because of their religious beliefs. So, I mean, even that I can handle. But when it comes to the famine, it just freaks me out. So anyway, I will try to finish the book. But if it gets gruesome, I don't know if I can handle any more. So we're at AD 1031. I'm not saying war isn't gruesome, because it is, but for some reason it's easier to handle rather than a person to a person eating the other one. You know, hi, how you doing? Well, your arm looks pretty delicious. You know, I just didn't want that in my history of my own brain. Though Henry had the choice of his father and the suffrages of a majority of the nobles to secure and confirm his succession, yet Constance, to whom he was an object of aversion, had neither lost the desire nor the hope of effecting his deposition from that throne, to which he had acceded in spite of her machinations. Baldwin, Count of Flanders, and Eudes, Count of Champagne, entered into her views, and being joined by many noblemen of France and Burgundy, supplied her with forces for the execution of her plans. De Martin, Senlis, Melun, Sens, Poissy, Coucy, Pouzet, and several other fortresses, declared in her favour and hoisted the standard of revolt. These were places of great strength in those days, and their importance was considerably increased by their vicinity to the capital, which waited for the event of the contest before it would come to a decision. Henry, astonished and incapable of revisiting the torrent and resisting the torrent, he left Paris and escaped with only 11 faithful followers into Normandy, and, deserted by his subjects, threw himself on the generous friendship of Duke Robert. That prince received him with all possible honour, supplied him with a powerful army, and sent orders to his uncle, Count Maugert, who commanded in Corbeil, to declare war against the insurgents, and lay waste their possessions with fire and sword. Similar orders were likewise issued to all the governors of the frontier towns. It was a maxim with this duke to show no quarter to rebels, to which severity he was probably indebted for the name he acquired of Robert the Devil. The king fixed his camp before the walls of Corbeil, where he was joined by a great number of his vassals, accompanied by a formidable body of troops. He then proceeded to Poissy, where he retook. He next reduced Pouzet, and thrice defeated the Count of Champagne, who escaped with difficulty the pursuit of the victor. This vigorous conduct disconcerted the projects of the Queen Dowager and her partisans, who were compelled to acknowledge that the young monarch had been grossly misrepresented to them. But Constance, ever implacable in her hatred, refused to listen to any proposals for an accommodation. In vain did her uncle, the Count of Anjou, exhort her to be reconciled to her son. she had long since abjured all the sentiments of nature, and she now obstinately rejected the remonstrances of reason. At last, however, finding herself now forsaken by her friends and allies, she was reluctantly persuaded to enter into a secret treaty with the king. Fortunately, she had no time to excite fresh intrigue, as she died the following year at Melun, and was interred at Saint-Denis by the side of a husband whose repose she had incessantly disturbed. The submission of the queen was followed by that of Prince Robert, whom Henri not only pardoned, but generously assigned him the Duchy of Burgundy, the investiture of which he himself had received from the king his father. From this prince sprang the first royal branch of the Dukes of Burgundy, who reigned over that country for nearly 4 centuries. They were succeeded by Philip the Bold, son to King John, head of the second house of Burgundy, which was extinguished in the person of Charles the Rash, who was slain before Nancy, at which period this duchy was irrevocably annexed to the crown. In 1032, Henri, being now peaceably seated on a throne of which, by his activity, valour, and moderation, he had shown himself worthy, directed his attention to the renewal of those alliances which his father had contracted with the neighbouring powers. For this purpose he had an interview with the Emperor Conrad, whose sister Matilda he espoused, he married. His next care was to acknowledge and repay the obligations he was under to the Duke of Normandy. To that prince he ceded the towns of Gifford, Chaumont, and Pontoise. We can say Pontoise or Pontoise. It's probably Pontoise. They did use F sometimes. With all that part of Vexin, which had hitherto belonged to the dominions of France. From 33 to 36, the death of Rodolphe, who, with the title of king, ruled that part of Burgundy which comprehended the countries of Switzerland and Savoy, the counties of La Brève, Dauphiné, and Lyonnois, kindled a war between Eudes, a count of Champagne, and the Emperor Conrad, who each claimed the succession and supported their pretensions by arms. But Eudes was compelled to yield to the superior force of his rival, and driven out of Burgundy, entered Lorraine, and possessed himself of Bern, it says. Before he could improve this advantage, he was encountered by Gothelon. Gothelon is a Duke of Lorraine. The defeat of the Count of Champagne was rendered decisive by his death, and King Henry himself, Henri, and the Emperor Conrad had equal subject for rejoicing at the destruction of a turbulent vassal and an enterprising neighbour. 1037 to 1040. Eudes left 2 sons, Stephen, Count of Champagne, and Thibault, Count of Chartres, Blois, and Tours. Both of them resigned all pretensions to Burgundy and turned their arms against their sovereign. The feudal law required that before any vassal could enter on possession of his territories, he should do homage to the king. The two counts refused to comply with this custom, because the king had not assisted their father against the emperor. In fact, the duty between the lord and his vassal was reciprocal. If the vassal was obliged to serve his lord in the wars, plural, the lord was equally obliged to assist his vassal in defense of that fief which he held of him. But this reason could not operate with regard to the Count of Champagne. Conrad had not taken up arms in order to deprive him of those provinces which he held as a vassal of the crown, but to prevent him from usurping a kingdom to which he himself had been declared sole heir. This then was only a pretext to which the insurgents had recourse for the purpose of concealing another design. In 1040 to 44, their real project was to place Prince Eudes, the king's brother, on the throne, under whose name they expected to be able to exert a despotic sway. An ancient chronicle, quoted by Duxigny, says that this prince was the eldest of the sons of Robert, but that he was excluded from the succession on the plea of insanity. But all other contemporary writers positively affirm that he was younger than either Henry or Duke Robert. Be that as it may, Eudes, being left without territories or establishment, was willing to listen to any plan which the enemies of his house might propose. And as he was assured of a speedy and effectual support, he summoned the king to admit him to a participation in the domains of his father. This was a signal to war. Eudes, with his confederates, took the field and committed dreadful devastations on the French territories, but they were soon routed by the royal army. Eudes himself was taken prisoner and secured at Orleans. The pardon of Theobald was purchased at the expense of Touraine. The Count of Champagne was happy to escape by the cession of a considerable part of his inheritance. But Galleran, Count of Melun, who had enlisted under the banners of unsuccessful rebellion, was formally attainted, it says. And the forfeiture of his property and life, the first example of a kind mentioned in history, proclaims the power which the crown had imperceptibly acquired. In 4-5 and 4-6, Normandy, 1045, Normandy in the meantime, being governed by a child, was torn by intestine commotions. The reign of Robert had been greatly distinguished for its wisdom and splendor. After reducing the Duke of Brittany to pay that homage which he had long refused to his liege lord, he was stricken with remorse for the sins he had committed, and undertook a journey of penitence to the Holy Sepulchre at Jerusalem, which, according to the superstitious maxims of the age, was the most infallible means of procuring pardon for the greatest crimes. But previous to his departure, he deemed it necessary to appoint a successor to the throne. He had no children by the sister of Canute, King of England, whom he had married from policy and repudiated from aversion. He therefore assembled the states of the duchy, and reforming them of his design, engaged them to swear allegiance to his natural son William, a child of 9 years, whom he had by Harlota, daughter of a tanner in Falaise. As he was a prudent prince, he could not but foresee the great inconveniences which must attend this journey, and the settlement of his succession, arising from the perpetual turbulency of the great, the claims of other branches of the ducal family, and the power of the French monarch. But all these considerations were surmounted. But the prevailing zeal for pilgrimages, and probably the more important they were, the more would Robert exult in sacrificing them to what he imagined to be his religious duty. So he's going off on a pilgrimage to relinquish himself of all crimes he's committed. This prince, as he apprehended, died in his pilgrimage, and the minority of his son was attended with all those disorders which might naturally be expected in that situation. The licentious nobles, freed from the awe of sovereign authority, broke out into personal animosities against each other, and made the whole country a scene of war and devastation. Roger, Count of Tournai, and Elaine, Duke of Brittany, advanced claims to the dominion of the state, and the King of France thought the opportunity favourable for reducing the power of a vassal, who had long appeared formidable to his sovereign. The first expedition of Henri into Normandy spread terror and consternation throughout the country, and the regency established by Robert exerted their utmost endeavours to avert the vengeance of a king whose enmity might prove fatal to their youthful ward. In consequence of their remonstrances, interest gave way to gratitude, and mindful of the obligations he had received from the late Duke, Henri now resolved to march to the assistance of his son, who was threatened with a formidable conspiracy of the nobles. At the head of this rebellion was Guy, son of Renaud, Count of Burgundy, by a daughter of Richard II, Duke of Normandy. This young nobleman, when his family was in disgrace, had retired to Rouen, where he was brought up with Duke William, who had just created him Count of Vernon and Brienne. But these marks of kindness were insufficient to command a grateful return. He now joined the rebels, and in the valley of the dunes, between Caen and Argentan, was met by the forces of Henri. The rebels maintained their ground with obstinate valour. The king himself was exposed and thrown from his horse by the powerful arm of Haman, a celebrated warrior, and was only preserved by the immediate succour of his attendants. But his victory was glorious and decisive, and the Battle of Dune fixed the sceptre in the hands of the Duke of Normandy. The acquisitions of the Normans were not confined to their settlements in France, independent of their exertions, in defence of which they had recently revived their ancient fame by the most hazardous exploits and the most wonderful successes in the other extremity of Europe. A few Norman adventurers in Italy had acquired such an ascendant not only over the Italians and Greeks, but the Germans and Saracens, that they expelled those foreigners, procured to themselves ample establishments, and laid the foundation of the opulent kingdoms of Naples and Sicily. Their progress in Italy had alarmed the vigilant Henri, or that he early discerned the lofty genius and unbounded ambition of William, that monarch soon violated the friendship he had newly professed, and seemed constantly to repent of the assistance he had afforded to the Duke of Normandy. William d'Arc, Count of Thélot, and son of a second marriage of Richard II, the predecessor of Robert the Devil, no longer concealed his pretensions to the ducal title, in which he was strongly supported by his brother Montger, Archbishop of Rouen. The power which this dignity conferred in those days on prelates over their episcopal city appeared to secure him the suffrage of the capital. William had just married Matilda, daughter to Baldwin, Count of Flanders, by Adela, daughter of King Robert and sister to Henri. As the princess was related to him, it was necessary to have a dispensation, which was then regarded as a violation to the sacred canon. The Pope, however, did not scruple to grant it, on condition that the Duke should found 4 hospitals to contain 400 poor people. Montger, less moved by a zeal for the discipline of the Church than by a desire of exciting a sedition favourable to the designs of his brother, excommunicated the new married couple. The sovereign pontiff, enraged at his audacity, caused him to be deposed by an assembly of prelates at Les Eaux. I'm all off right now. Sorry. And the Duke banished him to the island of Guernsey. So now someone's got banished to Guernsey. On 1047 AD, the Count of Thélot, in order to facilitate the execution of his project, had erected a strong fortress on the hill of Arques, where, being certain of assistance from the king, he hoisted the standard of rebellion and refused to pay to William the Bastard, we'll call him William the Bastard, that homage which was due to him as his liege lord. Okay, so now Tello is saying, no, I'm not going with William the Bastard. The fortress was accordingly besieged by the Duke, and the army which Henri had destined to cooperate with his ally was compelled to retreat with disgrace. A considerable detachment, in which their march towards Rouen had incautiously pressed before the main body. Between Essoucy and Mortimer, their negligence was chastised by the arms of the Normans, and a few escaped, and few, we'll just say few, to relate the melancholy fate of their companions. Henri himself, with the remainder of his forces, retired towards Paris, indignant at his disgrace and impatient to revenge his defeat by the destruction of his rival, while William, who had triumphed over his revolted subjects, was equally determined to pursue with eternal enmity the perfidy of the French monarch. That prince had formed a new alliance with the Duke of Guienne and the Count of Anjou, and engaged again to invade the territories of the Norman. His preparations were suitable to the greatness of the enterprise, and 2 armies, which he had diligently levied, threatened the destruction of the young Duke. The one was led by Henri in person. That's unusual. The other he entrusted to his brother Eudes, whom he released for that purpose from prison. But the superior number of his troops was served to augment his confusion. Those led by himself were continually harassed and repeatedly surprised, while the army commanded by his brother was defeated in a decisive action. In the Pays de Caux, with great slaughter. So that's where it happened. And pressed or broken on every side, the French were compelled hastily to evacuate a country which they had unjustly invaded, and the terms of peace which soon after followed were dictated by the victorious Duke of Normandy. In 1054 and 1055, this unsuccessful war was followed by a general peace, which lasted some years, when it had nearly been interrupted by the conduct of Count Thibaut, who, having been deprived of Touraine, sought and obtained the protection of the Emperor, Henri III, who made him his knight, and gave him the title of Count Palatine, a title to which no office was annexed, but which has, notwithstanding, been enjoyed ever since by the Counts of Champagne. This proceeding of Thibaut was considered as a violation of that duty and submission which a vassal owed to his lord. The king accordingly complained to the emperor, but could obtain no satisfaction or redress. It is said that he sent him a formal challenge to meet him in single faction or redress. Single faction? No. oh gosh, I doubled that one. Or combat, single faction, or single faction, to meet him in single combat. Okay, so he sent him a formal challenge to meet him in single combat, but it was not accepted. Imagine single combat would be a duel of some sort. If the French monarch showed the greatest courage, the emperor displayed the greatest prudence. So in 1059, the constitution of Henry being visibly impaired, though more from infirmities than from age, he thought it necessary to provide for the safety of the kingdom by the association of his son Philip, a young prince only in his 8th year, to the throne. With this view he convened a numerous assembly of the nobles and prelates at Rheims. The king, says Mézeray, having reminded the assembly of the services he had rendered the state, requested them all collectively, and each of them individually, to acknowledge his eldest son Philip for his successor, and to take the oath of fidelity to him. The whole assembly were unanimous in compliance, and the young prince was immediately crowned by the Archbishop of Rheims. The most remarkable circumstance attending this event was the attention shown by the clergy to promote an augmentation of their prerogatives. The legates, Hugh, Archbishop of Besançon, and Hermann Froy, Bishop of Sion, protested against the coronation, which they pretended could not take place without the Pope's consent. Their protest, however, was treated with the contempt it deserved. The Archbishop of Rheims also profited by the occasion to insist on a confirmation of all the privileges of his church, as well temporal as spiritual. That artful prelate made a long speech to prove that the right of anointing the kings of France belonging to the Archbishop of Rheims, in consequence of a decree of Pope Hormisdas in the time of Clovis, a decree that was merely chimerical, since it is certain this pious custom was absolutely unknown during the first race. The Archbishop then administered the following oath to the young prince, which betrays a greater zeal for the private advantage of the prelacy than for the general good of the nation, though the latter is not totally overlooked. I, Philip, who by the mercy of God am going to be crowned King of France, promise in the presence of the Lord and his saints to preserve to every one of you, in particular to your churches, your canonical privileges, to observe the laws, to administer justice to you, and with the assistance of the Almighty to protect you to the utmost of my power, as far as a prince ought to protect the bishops of his realm, and the churches which are entrusted to their care, according to the equity and reason. I also promise to the people over whom I am destined to rule, to enforce by my authority the observance of the laws. So he's saying this, and I'm a little confused because I thought he was very young, and only 8 years old or something. Did I get that wrong? Maybe it's the date. We'll go on the date of it. But yeah, it looks like it was 1059. He was in his 8th year. He was only 8 years old. He was maybe 9 years old at that point, 8 or 9. So, wow. Very well versed at that age. Henri did not long survive the coronation of his son. A dose of psychic administered at an improper time put an end to his existence at Vitry-en-Brie in the 55th year of his age and the 30th of his reign. He was interred at Saint-Denis, and he was a warlike prince of heroic valor and exemplary piety, a friend to virtue. Merit was the best recommendation to his esteem, and being endued with a manly spirit, he knew how to make his authority respected. By his first wife, Matilda, he had no children, but by his second, whose name was Anne, he had Philip, who succeeded him in the throne, Robert, who died young, Hugh, who by his marriage with Adelaide, daughter of Herbert, became the chief of the second branch of the Counts of Vermandois, and the Princess Emma, whose fate is unknown. Queen Anne was daughter to Jaroslaw, Prince of Muscovy, to whom the Europeans gave the title of Duke, and who was called by the ruffians Tsar, since corrupted into Tsar. Okay, now why they're saying it's corrupted into Tsar, when it sounds the same to me. They had it at T-Z-A-A-R, switched into C-Z-A-R. He thinks it's corrupted. It is remarkable that the regency was not entrusted to the Queen Mother. Although there were many precedents in her favour, it is even said that she advanced no claim to that dignity, finding herself without support and without authority in a country where she had scarce any relations. Reason more than necessity made her resign her rights without hesitation or repugnance. This honour appeared to be reserved for Robert, Duke of Burgundy, but he was too powerful. His connections with the nobles of France, his former pretensions to the throne, and the fear of exposing him to new temptations, all operated to his exclusion. Baldwin, Count of Flanders, a wife prince, highly renowned, it says, highly renowned for his courage and resolution, was appointed regent of the kingdom, with the title of Marquis of France. The event demonstrated the wisdom of the choice. Baldwin discharged the duties of his station with punctuality and honour. He took care that his pupil should have a proper education, and governed his kingdom with great prudence. During a part of this reign, the Roman Church was governed by the 3 anti-popes, who had all procured their election either by violence or bribery. These 3 pontiffs, by a convention hitherto unexampled, agreed to divide the revenues of the Church equally between them, and to live in perfect union. This harmony subsisted as long as they had money to pay for their pleasures, but when that failed, each of them sold his part of the papal dignity to Dean Gracian, a man of wealth and quality, whom Glaber, a contemporary writer, calls a good and pious priest of known sanctity. It was determined, however, that the gift of Peter pence, which was received from England, should be assigned to the young Benedict IX, who had been elected to the chair of St. Peter when only 12 years old, and long before the other two. Simony was extremely prevalent at this period. In a council holden at Lyon, 45 bishops and 23 priests publicly acknowledged themselves guilty of that crime and resigned their benefices. The celibacy of the priests, though established in the Western Church, was but ill observed, particularly in the provinces bordering on Germany, in Brittany and Normandy. Some of the clergy publicly kept women addicted to every species of debauchery, and others had concubines, or chambrières, as they were then called. There were some who even formed alliances by civil contracts, from the persuasion that it was better to have lawful wives than to live in a state of fornication. In vain did the councils and popes, armed with all the thunders of the church, deprive them of their livings, lay them under their interdict, excommunicate them, and forbid laymen to attend their masses. They could not repress this licentiousness, so that they were holding brothels right there in their churches. They could not repress this licentiousness till they permitted the nobles to seize and sell for slaves all the children who sprang from those illicit marriages. That severity at length had the desired effect, and if the clergy did not become more chaste, at least they became more circumspect in their conduct. During this reign, the doctrine of transfrustration was strongly combated in France, and the real presence of Christ in the sacrament formally denied. This opposition, the Abbé Vallet, am I saying it right, Vallet? I want to say Vallet, but it's not, it's Valli, isn't it? It's Abbé Valli. Abbé Valli. As the Abbé Valli calls, go look at a town, how it's spelled and pronounced with an Ly. I believe it really is E, Valli. And it's used all throughout, so I really need to get that one right. The sad fruits. This Abbé Valli is saying the sad fruits of the vain subtitles of philosophy. Oh my gosh, that's a good one, isn't it? The sad fruits of the vain subtitles. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't subtitles. Let's say this one up again. Subtleties. The sad fruits of the vain subtleties of philosophy. Yeah, it's definitely for me a sad fruit. Anyway, we, however, must give it a different character and assert it to be the triumph of reason over superstition. But a disputation on points of faith would be idle, because useless. Gosh dang, this one did not flow. Because useless, those whom we believe to be in error are equally certain that the error is with us. And since all the arguments that have been employed for ages have proved inadequate to produce conviction on either side, we see no good that could possibly accrue from the continuation of the contest. But if a struggle, I think I need self-help by now, but if a struggle must be observed between the contending parties, let it be a struggle of virtue, whose weapons are benevolence, charity, and brotherly love. Let a spirit of emulation subsist, but let its object be to reconcile principle to practice, and to prove the justice of the one by the rectitude of the other. Oh my gosh. The chief supporters on this, heretical opposition, as it was then called, were Lampreys, a monk of Corbie, Berenger, Archdeacon of Angers, and the celebrated John Scott Erigena, the friend and instructor of Charles the Bold. The doctrine they attacked was defended by Lampreys, abbot of St. Stephen's at Caen, who afterwards accompanied William I to England, where he was promoted to the See of Canterbury. Unfortunately, the contest was attended with no serious consequences. All right, that's it for me at this one. Before I go on to Philip I, I do really want to commend, they are tutoring these kings, really tutoring these kings at young ages. Unbelievable that the young Philip I, at 8 years old, could be so much a spokesman already. It's incredible. And yeah, I'm very disappointed actually with Robert. Back to Robert II the Pious. If all of these heinous crimes were going on during the famine, he really needed to be stricter with the people, far stricter, and even reduce populations to not let that go on further. If they were that criminal, if they were that much a criminal, he let it go on too much. He was not patrolling the we'll say it, the commonality of man, because man is a common beast, isn't he? That he would even eat another to survive.